Well, it's just a minute or two before 7 p.m., but I figured I would rip the Band-Aid and get the live started because I am so eager to show you what came off of the long arm and got bound this weekend. I've got lots to share with you, but we're going to do this in a little bit different format. Happy Tuesday, friends. I am so glad you are here with me. And if you are new to my channel, first of all, let me just say welcome. I am so glad you're here. Every week, I try to do a video on Tuesday telling the story of something. And most of the times, those videos are pre-recorded and edited, and they're a little bit more smoother, I think, in delivery because I can edit out the pauses where I'm thinking through things or the double takes when I didn't quite explain myself clearly. And of course, I have time to deal with the technical stuff or stuttering like I just did. But as most of you may already know, my work schedule is picking up a little bit and I've been pretty busy lately, and I just haven't had a lot of time this week to sit down and record my video and then edit it. So I figured, why not just spend about half an hour, 45 minutes, maybe an hour chatting with you over a live stream and showing you all of the beautiful photos of things that I have done. The tech will allow me to do it and we can interact with each other in a live session, and I can keep the live stream to a short enough period of time where it might be a longer vlog, but it should still hopefully be an enjoyable replay. So if you're watching this on the replay, let me know in the comments down below. And for those of you that are watching live, I do see several of you out here, and I just want to give a few of you a shout out. I see Day is there. Candace says she loves my hair. Thank you. Really excited about that. When I got my hair cut a few weeks ago, the lady that cut my hair is the same lady that's been cutting my mom's. It's the first time she's done mine, and she saw the wave that I have in it. And I told her she could do whatever she wanted. I just wanted it to look nice around my face. And she said that her goal was to cut it so that I could wear it straight or I could wear it naturally wavy. And so decided to wear it wavy today. Ironically, this takes less time than drying it out. And sometimes I like it better than the other way. I see Shirley McGuire is here from Kentucky. I see Diana from Iowa. Candace is here from Peachtree City, Georgia. Joanne is from Greenwood, South Carolina. Hello. Beth from Goody Goods is here. And you guys, I'm so excited because all of these quilts, with the exception of one, were actually quilted by Beth over at Goody Good. So we're going to do that final reveal. And I want to give her a really big plug because her prices are fair. Her turnaround time is great. And the quality of her quilting is phenomenal. And you're going to see that in the reveals that I'm going to have today. So make sure to check her out. Beth from Goody Goods, and Beth, I think her website is like goodygoods.com, but she's also on Instagram, she's on YouTube. You just look for her as Goody Goods, Gudegoods. And on the replay, I will actually link to all of her internet stuffs in the description box down below in case you are interested in hiring her services. Looks like we still have several other people here. I see all of you, but I can't read out everyone, but I do see you, Kathy, Karen, Deborah, Lily, Maggie, Sarah, Shelley. I see all of you. So yay. Okay. How do we get started? How do I get started? Like, do I just dive into the photos? Maybe. Well, let me preface let me start by telling you what have I been doing. So this past week, I got back, well, 2 steps back. A couple of weeks ago, I went through the rack that I keep in my room with all of my quilt tops. So as I finish a quilt top in my room, I fold it up and I drape it over this beautiful quilt rack that my husband gave to me a few years ago, several years ago now, for Christmas. I love this thing. It has always held my quilt tops that need to be quilted. In my studio, I don't have a picture of it right now, but in my studio, this quilt rack leans up against the wall next to my long arm. And that's kind of a reminder that these need to get quilted, but it's also where all my batting and my other long arm supplies are, and it's right by the long arm, so it makes sense. The problem is, maybe you have this problem too, I produce more quilt tops than I quilt. So maybe for every 3 quilt tops I make, I might quilt half of one. And it becomes a bit of a problem because all of those quilts build up on my quilt rack, and then I feel overwhelmed. And I feel like I'm just in over my head and I'm never going to get caught up. And so occasionally I like to do what I call quilt top bankruptcy. That's the moment where you look at all the quilt tops that are on your ladder or your pile to be quilted and you decide, do I really have the time to quilt all of these? And if the answer is no, then let's figure out a remedy for it, right? When that happens to me, I take a look at every quilt top that's on my quilt rack and I pick it up and I decide first, is this a quilt that I want to see finished? And if the answer to that is yes, then the next question is this a quilt that I personally want to quilt or I just need it done? And if the answer is yes, I want to be the one to finish it, then it goes back onto the quilt rack because I want it done and I want to be the one to do that. If, however, it is one that I just want to see finished, then I ask one more question. Do I care about having it when it's done? Or do I just want it to live its best quilty life in this world? And if the answer is that I want it back for whatever reason, then I've been leaning into hiring long arm services because I don't have the bandwidth to quilt every quilt top that I get. If it's one that I just want it to live its best quilty life, my story with it is done. The chapter that I have written in that quilt's book is done and over with. Then in that case, I take the quilt top and I'll pay it forward. Sometimes I've been known to sell those quilt tops on Whatnot. Sometimes I pay them forward as gifts to fellow quilters who just love the quilting process and don't want to do the piecing. Either way is acceptable as long as it is moving forward in its journey. Let's be honest, for those quilt tops, they're just going to die in my quilt room unless I push them forward. So I give myself that opportunity to clean the slate. And when that activity is done, then I have a rack of quilt tops that makes me excited to get to work. You know, when my daughter was younger, when Zoe was a toddler, I was so excited about having a little girl. Jason and I had Zoe late in life. We are both each other's second marriages. He had two kids from a previous marriage, and Zoe was my first and my only child. I was so excited to have a little girl that I did all of the things. I bought all of the toys. I had to have everything. I overwhelmed her room with all of the toddler toys because I wanted her to have all the things that I did not have. And since I waited so long to have kids, I was in my 30s and I didn't have any siblings for her, she kind of got the brunt of everything. She got all of the affection. But I bring that up because Jason said to me at one point when we were raising Zoe when she was younger that she didn't play with a lot of those toys because she didn't even know they were there. And that thought kind of sticks in my head as I'm sitting in my sewing room. If I've got fabric on my shelf or notions that are hidden in a drawer or quilt tops on the quilt rack, when I get to a certain point where there are so many of them, I forget what's there. So I really enjoy taking time to take a step back, recalibrate myself with what I have, and destash or move things forward so that I can get to the things that I really want to play with. So I'm really excited to show you what we're going to do today. When I went through that quilt rack, I had I had 6 quilt tops that were already pieced and just needed to be quilted. They just needed to be quilted, and I didn't need to do them. I didn't want to do them. So I paid them forward to Beth. I put them in a box. Some of them had backings, others she's picking a backing for, and I sent them out to her and I said, "You have total creative control. You've done a couple of my quilts before. I trust you. Have fun. The goal is get them quilted and then send them back to me." And I did prioritize them. I put the most important one on top and then the second, third, fourth, etc. And spoiler alert, there were actually 2 or 3 other quilts, I think 3 other quilts that were hot on the heels of finishing the piecing journey that I knew were going to go to her pretty quickly. So I do have a couple more that I'm sending out because these are ones that need to be turned around right away. All right. So I shared that story with you to tell you that we're going to dive into some beautiful quilts. Before I do, I just want to take a look at the chat, make sure there are no questions that need to be answered. It would help if I did this. Also, I do see Stephanie from Memoirs of a Long Arm Quilter in here, and I want to let you know that we're going to be doing a fun little collabby thingy. Once my live is done, she has a live stream that is scheduled to go at 8 o'clock tonight. And so once this is done, it's going to automatically redirect you over to Stephanie's channel, to her live stream tonight. But there are other content creators out there. I think I see Katie too, so I don't want to leave her out. I know she has a video scheduled to go at 8 o'clock. Hers is a pre-record. It's not a live stream. Stephanie's is going to be a live stream. So we're going to send live stream viewers over to another live stream event. But don't forget that there's lots of content creators out there, and they would love it if you stopped by and checked out their content, whether it's tonight, tomorrow, or the next day. Beth says, same. I need to work through my fabric and make it visible, out of sight, out of mind. That is a true thing. And it is the reason why you see all the fabric on the shelves behind me arranged so that you can see every cut of fabric. Because if I don't see the fabric, I forget it's there. And then one of two things happens. I forget how excited I was to work with the fabric, or I just keep buying that one piece of fabric that I really liked because I forgot I had it. So that's definitely a thing for me. Looking through the chat, Susie says, good evening, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Yes, happy Tuesday. Kathy said, quilt top bankruptcy. Interesting concept. Anything bankruptcy. Have you guys heard of the email bankruptcy? You do the same thing with email. You go on vacation for 2 weeks, you come back from work, and you have 1,000 emails, and you're like, you know what? Archive. If it's important, they'll email me back. It's a real thing, I promise you. We're just going to apply it to the quilting world. All right, let's get into some of the stories because I can't wait to show you what these are done. So we're just going to dig right into it. We're going to go to this interesting new view, and we're going to hope that the technology works with us. I did set up right below here. If it works, you may see chat scroll on the screen. If it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. But I have a slideshow created, and I want to tell the story of these quilts picture by picture. Looks like it's not going to work, the chat, that is, and that's totally fine. So we're going to start off with the first quilt that Beth sent back and I got bound. And that is, dun, da, 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 this is the Fat Quarter Shop 2018 Designer Mystery Quilt. Now, you guys may remember this from a couple weeks ago. I showed you the quilt top and I talked about having this piece and how excited I was to have this done. And that's still true. I was super excited to have it done. This quilt measures like 65-ish, maybe give or take a few inches, 65-ish inches wide by like 92 or 93 long. It is a huge quilt. And I promise you, it gave us quite a bit of a workout when we were trying to take photos of it. In fact, my husband is holding this quilt up and he's standing on a bench on our deck that you're supposed to sit on, but the only way that he could get it up and over is to stand on the bench and hold the quilt over. And it looks like the chat just started working, so yay. When he was holding it up for me to photograph, this is so funny, he's sitting there and he's holding it and he's got it way up. And I'm taking all the pictures of the front of the quilt and I'm taking videos because I don't know what content, what footage I'm going to need for my vlog, but I want to get it captured. I want to get it documented. And I was like, okay, we can do the back. And he goes, whoa, and he puts his arms down and he was like, that's a heavy quilt. This quilt is heavy. Oh my gosh. I have never understood, like I never knew a quilt could be as heavy as this thing is, and it is huge. It is huge. A couple of years ago, my husband's ex-wife, who they co-parent very well together, and she is a part of his life forever. So when I married him, I essentially married into the family, right? So we don't have any ill will towards anyone. She's there. She's part of his life. A few years ago when I started quilting, she kept asking me for a heavy quilt, and I had no idea what she meant by that. Most of the time I was making lap quilts, but she kept saying, no, my grandma's quilts used to be really heavy. And I'm like, why did she put jeans in the middle? I don't understand. And now, after making that quilt, I get it. No, it's not heavy like a weighted blanket, but man, that thing's heavy to carry around, which makes me worried about my Rose and Bloom quilt, which I showed to you last week's video. That quilt is 96 by 96, bigger than this one. So that one's going to weigh even more than this. Ugh. So let's talk about this quilt. This quilt was my oldest UFO. I talked about that before, and I want to point out a couple of things here. You may not see them on the screen. You might have to zoom in to see. But the first thing I want to point out is the quilting that Beth did. She did an amazing job, and we're going to get to some detailed shots of that in just a couple moments. But if you follow her on Instagram, you probably already saw this in her social media content. She has much better photos of this quilt. But I want to point out a couple of mistakes because they're there. And you wouldn't know it if I didn't point it out to you. If you look in the top row of blocks, you've got 2 flowers and then 2 quilt blocks. The quilt blocks that have the flying geese units going around the center square, there's 2 corner units that are made up of 4 patch blocks. I did not know until after it was quilted, after it was bound, and after it was washed, that those 2 4 patches were going in different directions. They're supposed to be going in the same direction. I don't know if it's supposed to be going the way the top left one is, or the bottom right one is, or neither. I don't know, but I know they're not uniform. The second mistake that I want to point out is in the second row down. It's the second block from the left, and it's got these star points that go around the center piece of fabric. And if you're looking at the block, I think what you're seeing is the upper left quadrant, the upper left corner block, that's rotated wrong. I knew about that before I sent it out for quilting, and I strategically made a decision to not fix it because and it's the same reason that I'm going to cling to with the first one, because the story of this quilt, as I mentioned in my vlog last time when I talked about this, is each of those blocks were started and pieced in 2018. That's where I was then. Do I still make mistakes? Yes, absolutely. But those were mistakes that I made 5 years ago, and I didn't want to go back and change them once. Well, mostly they were all already in the quilt, and I didn't want to tear it apart. So, I think I'm going to turn off the chat on the screen because I notice it just keeps jumping, and that might be distracting for people that are watching on the live stream. So if you're watching the replay and you want to see the live chat, you can click live chat down below and you'll see after it's processed all the live chat comments that are happening as we're talking. So those blocks are in there, and I'm going to tell you right now, it doesn't change how beautiful the quilt is. Here's my rule. This is what I feel like I'm leaning towards. When I have a mistake in a quilt top, I tend to leave it in if it's not going to impact the overall look and feel of the quilt. When I did my Rose and Bloom quilt, I noticed one of the half square triangle units was turned wrong, and it changed the entire layout of the whole quilt. And so I did take a minute to stop and rip that and fix it. But with these, the quilt still looks like a beautiful sampler quilt, so I left it. So there you go. Now, as we're looking at this quilt, I do want to talk to you a little bit about, here's the back. I want to talk to you about this color. This color of the fabric that's on the back is the same color that's the background of the front of the quilt. And it's this, I don't know how else to describe it, and this might be horrible, but it's a cross between like pea green and neon green. It's that fig tree green. You know what I'm talking about. If you've gotten fig tree fabrics before, it's a fig tree green. And my sister Alicia absolutely loves this color green. So after I got the quilt and I bound it and I washed it and I cuddled with it a time or two, I decided it was time to pay this quilt forward. It has not left my home yet. I have this goal in my head to make all of my siblings and my nieces and nephews, all of my family, my family and my in-laws, I want everybody to have at least one quilt that I have made for them, whether I just pieced it, somebody else quilted it, doesn't matter. I want everybody to have a quilt that I have made for them. And my sister Alicia does have a couple, but she has really small quilts. They're like lap size quilts, and this would be amazing. So after I chartreuse, yeah, maybe that's the color. Maybe after I've slept with it a few times, I decided it was probably time to pay it forward to her. Everybody that looked at this quilt in my family, by the way, as soon as they saw it, they were like, oh, that's Alicia. Oh, that's Alicia. Oh, that's Alicia. So here's where we stand with this quilt. I am sleeping with it every night because every quilt that leaves my home has to be pre-loved by me for a set amount of time. It might be an hour, it might be a decade. I don't know, but every quilt that leaves my home has to be pre-loved by me. And so I am loving the heck out of this one right now. But while I'm loving the heck out of it, I am making a very special label in my own handwriting for the quilt that I will hand stitch onto the back, and then I will fold up nicely and put in the mail and send it up to Michigan, where it will continue to get much, much love from my sister. So the quilting that Beth did on this is just kind of a very loose, you can kind of see the texture here. It's kind of a very loose overall design. By the way, this is me posing with the quilt outside. Isn't it gorgeous? You can see the colors so much more with this picture. The shading, the shadows when we took the first two pictures weren't great. But she did this really kind of like all over edge to edge loose design. And I believe the reason why she did that stitching is because she didn't want it to be quilted to death. She figured it was a quilt that we wanted to use. And so she wanted to be have more drape, more soft, more pliable. And I do see her in the chat, so she can talk about that a little bit more. And I wanted to give you a close-up view of what that quilting looks like. It's kind of like a circle with another circle and then another circle all kind of like echoed around it. I'm really proud of this quilt. I'm really proud that I saw it through. And I'm really happy to say it is completely finished. We're going to move on to this next quilt. And before I do, I just want to tell you, Lori says, I pre-cuddle my quilts too. Yes. I want to tell you before I start this next quilt, this one is very special to me. I have already started adding a sleeve to it. Just has to be hand tacked down in the back because it's going to be on rotation in my sewing room. When we went to Lancaster this year for our retreat, Mary and I went on a retreat together with Donna and some of her friends from her So It Seems crew. And we spent a day in Lancaster. Mary didn't get to join us for that Lancaster trip, but she did make a special drive out to Lancaster. And she bought this 60-inch wide wire quilt frame for like 20 bucks. And I have it hanging. It was a gift from her to me. It is hanging up in my room. And I keep looking over there because it's on the wall right now. And it's holding a quilt. It can accommodate a quilt up to 60 inches. Well, this next quilt that I want to show you is actually 56 inches by 56 inches. And this is going to be on rotation in my room. It's on one of two quilts right now, maybe three actually, that will be actually, yeah, three that will be on rotation to be displayed. And the reason why this one is special to me is because this was another Fat Quarter Shop block of the month. This is the Bliss quilt. This came in sew sampler boxes, just the pattern, in sew sampler boxes from April 2022 to March 2023. In April, when I got the first pattern, I quickly bought the kit, the fabric kit, because I thought, okay, yeah, sure, I'll do another one of these block of the months, not a problem, and I'll make videos for them. And you guys probably, if you've been around the channel, you may remember I started doing tutorial videos for some of these blocks, but the reality is I didn't have the time to keep up with these and I got behind. I wanted to get caught up. My intention was always to get caught up. I enjoyed making the blocks, but then Fat Quarter Shop revealed the finishing layout for this quilt. And oh my goodness, I was just overwhelmed. I took one look at the finishing kit and went, oh gosh, I'm never going to have enough time to finish this quilt in that layout. I don't know if I want to do it. And it just sat. And I made an impulse decision. It wasn't an impulse decision. Maybe, I don't know what you would call it, but I made a decision. I decided that the quilt had like 4 or 5, maybe 6 blocks made. And I had all of the finishing layout and all the patterns and everything. I just knew I wasn't ever going to do the work. And so I was ready to play bankruptcy with that project too. So I offered it up as a free package. If anybody wanted it, I would mail it to one of my VIP members. We were on one of our monthly Zoom chats. I showed what it was and I said I just wasn't going to finish the quilt. I knew I wasn't going to finish the quilt. It was hanging over my head. And if somebody wanted to take it and finish it, they were more than welcome to have the quilt. Well, one of my lovely subscribers, her name is Stephanie Fulton, she said, yeah, I'll take it. And I thought, great. So we packed up the fabric, we packed up the blocks, we packed up the patterns, and we sent it on to her, no cost to her, just a lovely project for her to finish. About a month or so later, I honestly don't know how much time elapsed, but some amount of time went by and I got a package to my P.O. box. And it was from Stephanie. And inside was this quilt with all of the binding prepared. It was not quilted, it was just the quilt top. And she had a lovely letter enclosed that had her name and her phone number. And she talked about how she's been a quilter for 30 years. She has more quilts than she knows what to do with. And she just wanted the opportunity to finish that quilt top for me because of what I have done for her just by producing the content that I have. That meant so much to me. I knew as soon as I read that letter, and I of course texted her a little bit, we chatted, I knew that this was going to be a quilt that I could not give away because this, I feel like, is a quilt from you, my subscribers. I started it, my subscribers finished piecing it, and then guess what? I sent it off to Beth for quilting and I told her the story and I think she got a little weepy-eyed as well. So she took really good care of this quilt and I want to show you some of the details here. It is absolutely stunning. By the way, Stephanie, if you ever see her in the chat, she calls this the 6,000 flying geese quilt and that's you can see why she does. Here is a close-up of one of my favorite blocks in this quilt and the quilting detail that Beth did. This was the top quilt on the pile that I had sent to Beth. She knew that this was going to be her priority. This had to be the first one done. And she said as soon as she saw it, she knew exactly what she wanted to do. Why she did this, I have no idea, but it looks great. And that block, I don't think I pieced that block. I think Stephanie did. And yeah, I don't know which ones I did and which ones I didn't do, but I will tell you that this block to me is very special because it's the reason I signed up for the Sew Sampler boxes back in 2017. I watched several other content creators. I think Yvette Renee was one, Ranger K was one. There were a couple of content creators out there opening the Sew Sampler boxes back in 2017, 2018, and I was watching them because I wanted to get the box, but I didn't know if I wanted to spend the money on it. And one of the things that I really liked about the Sew Sampler box and made me pull the trigger was the sew along that they were doing with flower baskets. 12 months of flower baskets. I was so excited. I signed up, but I didn't sign up until like the end of that sew along, whatever year that was. So I only got like the last 2 or 3 block patterns from that quilt, and I never made the flower basket quilt. But this is on my bucket list. If I have a bucket list of quilts I want to make, this is one. I want to make a flower basket quilt. So may end up going out to Fat Quarter Shop and buying all those recipe cards so that I can put that quilt together. This quilt is absolutely gorgeous. Here is a shot of the back. And what I love about the back is it's got that red fig tree fabric, but the binding is aqua, which is my favorite color. I love blues. It pops against that background and you can see how nice it is right there. I've done something a little different with this one. I know that this is going to be on display in my quilt room, and I would like to be able to use this quilt to display at quilt shows. So I know that sometimes when you register a quilt or submit a quilt for a quilt show, they want the binding to be tacked down to the back. And of course I want a sleeve on it because I'm going to have it on rotation here, and that sleeve has to be compliant with whatever a quilt show is going to require, which I think is a 4-inch sleeve. So I did put the sleeve on it as well. But the reason why I'm talking about the binding is because I tacked the binding down to the front. And then I folded it over to the back, and I have not yet hand tacked it in. What I did do was the glue method, which I have seen other people talk about. I know Ian's done a video on it. Everybody's talked about this. I've never done it until I did this. I spent like an entire hour just sitting here watching Marvel movies. Yes, I was watching my superhero movies while I was like glue, 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 fold, iron, glue, 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 fold, iron. I got glue all over the tops of my fingernails, but totally worth it because that glue method, using the iron to heat it in, was absolutely awesome. It really it's locked in. I don't have words for you. It's locked in. It's not going anywhere. That said, I'm not going to start throwing the quilt around. I do need to go in there and hand stitch the binding back. I've never done that before. Guess I'm going to have to learn how to do it because the binding can't just stay glue forever. But this is awesome. Beth said you did a phenomenal job with the piecing, Stephanie. Yes, she did. And I will just go back to this overall view. Isn't that gorgeous? Like, just take in the beauty of that quilt. I told Stephanie, I messaged her, texted her, and I told her, I was like, I feel like we should try to submit this for QuiltCon. And then we could put your name on it. Like, I think the story behind the quilt is really inspiring. Like, I've talked with Donna about this, with Jason about it, with my mom, with Mary. I've talked with several people about it. And I've said, every time I mention this quilt, I always say something along the lines of, if you throw something out or you set it free and it comes back, it was meant to be. And so for this quilt, I set it free and it came back. So it's meant for me. So take that with a, think about that next time you set a quilt free. If it comes back, it was meant for you. All right, let's move on to the next quilt. So this one's a fun story too. This is my Magnolia quilt. So excited. So this one is completely bound. This is made with the Magnolia pattern and the Seashore Drive fabric from Sherry and Chelsea last year. If you guys have been around my channel for more than a minute, you already know that one of my favorite fabric designers is Sherry and Chelsea, and the Seashore Drive fabric I couldn't get enough of because I've made a lot of things with this fabric and I keep wanting to make more. This is a collab I did with Tiffany from Tiffany's Quilting Life in the springtime, I want to say. Maybe it was even earlier than that. It was sometime in 2023, I think, maybe 2022. We decided we were both going to take the Magnolia pattern from Chelsea Stratton and bring our own fabric to it and make our quilt. She had hers done a long time ago. I sat on this one. I got the piecing done, but it sat on my quilt rack forever for two reasons. The first reason is I got a little bit of gunk, literally, just like a little spot of something on the white fabric on this. And I was completely beside myself. I thought I had ruined the quilt and I couldn't get past that. I didn't know if I wanted to take that piece of fabric out and replace it, or if I just needed to leave it in there and test if it would come out in the wash or what. What I did realize, though, I did a test several months after that happened. I took a scrap piece of that fabric and I got the gunk from my machine onto the fabric. And then I just applied some Grandma's spot remover, stitched around the edge so it didn't fray, and tossed it in a regular load of wash to see if that would come out. And it came out. So all I did for the quilt top is I took Grandma's spot remover and I put it on that same stuff that I got on the quilt. That way, when I got to the point where I was going to wash the quilt, I could have some level of confidence that that gunk or whatever was in there would come out completely. The second reason why I didn't quilt this or get it finished as quickly as maybe Tiffany, that's her name, as maybe Tiffany did, is because I felt like the quilt was too small. I wanted to make it bigger. Now, my husband is 6 feet tall and he is holding that quilt up all the way up. His arms are fully extended. So it's not going to be a good bed size quilt, but it is a really good lap size or couch size quilt. I really love this quilt. I wanted to make it bigger, but in the end, that's not what happened. This was one of those other quilts that was sitting on my quilt rack and I just wanted to get it done. I loved it. I wanted to have it done, but I couldn't decide on what I wanted to do for the extra borders. So it just kind of sat there waiting for that decision to be made. And Christmas last year, my sister and a couple of their family members came into my sewing room and I did a little mini quilt show. I held up all of the quilts that I had on my quilt rack and they were oohing and on. And a few of them were like, that one's mine. That one's mine. That one's mine. So this one got dibs by my other sister, Nicole. I have two sisters, Alicia and Nicole. So this week, both of them have a quilt from my room that I'm gifting to both of them. They both have quilts from me, but now they both have a new one. Nicole loved this quilt so much. She wanted it. And I wrestled with the idea of, okay, now I need to add borders, and now I need to be the one to quilt this because my sister wanted it. But then I realized I don't need to quilt it, right? The goal here isn't that I have to put every stitch into that quilt. I pieced it. I picked the fabric. I followed the pattern. I did all of the work. I can allow somebody else to finish it if it will mean that the quilt can go to the home it was meant to be for. So I just figured she didn't know about the wrestling decision I was having about the borders. I didn't need to tell her about it. I just needed to get the quilt done. So I sent it out to Beth. Constance says, I am interested in getting some of the stain remover to have on hand. Yes, Grandma Spot Remover, I can recommend highly. Absolutely worth the investment. So this is the front of the quilt. Here is a close-up of the quilting that Beth did. You may recognize the stitching that she did here. This is the same, I think, Beth let us know. I think this is the same stitching that she did on the tumbling blocks quilt that Mary and I both did. We each used half of the same layer cake, the same background fabric, and added our own borders. And I think she used the same stitching on that. Hello, Teresa. Hello, Sean. See you guys. I see you guys there too. The Quilting Compound says, I have used Tide pens and that has worked. Awesome. So this is a close-up of the front and then the back. Oh, all right. So before I show you the back, let me just tell you, I am cheating a little bit over here because I used to be that person that was like, no, I want matchy-matchy. I want whatever the fabric line for the front is to be on the back. And I have recently decided that does not need to be the way that I do all of my quilts. Do I want it to coordinate? Sure. Does it need to be matchy-matchy exact? No, it doesn't. So what I did is started leaning into the world of, of 108 fabric. I buy it by the bolt. And in this case, I bought a whole bolt of this beautiful blue thatched fabric from Robin Pickens, a whole bolt of the 108. And I have several quilts with this as the background, or the backing rather. What this allows me to do is take a good chunk of 108, sometimes the entire bolt, load it onto my long arm, and then I can line up multiple quilts and get those done. Or I can cut them off into multiple 3-yard cuts and just have them set on my shelf to be tagged for a quilt when I send it out the door. I love this blue. This is what I would consider a staple in my room because I work with so many different blues, so many different purples, so many different pinks, and this tends to coordinate with a lot of the stuff that's on my shelf. But most of the bolts of 108s that I have are actually neutrals. They're grays, they're low volumes, they're fabrics that will work with just about anything. And the whole goal behind that is if I have a quilt that I don't care about the backing for, if I don't care enough about the backing to buy a specific backing for it, I've got neutrals, and that will allow me to stop worrying and overthinking about the backing and just get the quilt done. Gray has been my go-to. This blue has been the other one. The quilting detail on this from the backside is amazing. You can see so many more of those flowers when it's zoomed into just that solid, it's not a solid blue, it's actually a little bit of a texture. It's got a bit of movement to it, but without all of the piecing and the different fabrics, you can see that stitching show up a lot more. The quilt was finished off with a really pretty binding. This isn't from the same line, and I will go back to this first picture that I showed you of the entire quilt. That's actually a blossom fabric. So it is a basic from Riley Blake. Christopher Thompson is the designer behind Blossom. I can't tell you what color that is because I didn't have any of the salvage on hand. But the reason why I bring that up is because I knew I wanted to let my sister pick how she wanted the quilt bound. So I sent her a picture of the quilt and I asked her, which of these colors is popping at you? Which color would you like to see around the edge of the quilt? And she said, I thought she was going to say the purple because the girl loves purple, but she said she really liked the aquas and the coral. And I went, well, I don't think I have any of those aquas, but I do maybe have a little bit of the coral. And I was thinking about that fabric that I just showed you. If you look at that binding strip, I was thinking about this because this is the fabric that my mom used to work on her charm square quilt. If you remember from a couple of weeks ago, she took a charm pack of the Seashore Drive fabric and some yardage. It was this yardage. And she just did a 2.5-inch border around every 5-inch square and then sewed all those squares together and then put on some borders and she was done. I was thinking about that fabric and I went and grabbed it, and lo and behold, it was a blossom fabric, basic from Riley Blake, and it worked beautifully with this line from Sherry and Chelsea, which is from Moda Fabric. So sometimes switching things up totally works. It is gorgeous. Beth said that coral is gorgeous. I agree with you. So those are the first 3 that I worked on this weekend, and I could probably end it here and be like, man, I got a lot done. In reality, all I did was square up quilts and work on binding. But there was one more thing that I did, and I started this a couple weeks ago, and this is the one that I am most proud of, and I saved it for last for a reason. Remember when I talked about at the beginning of the video that quilt bankruptcy and how it can free you up and make you inspired to work on things? Well, this round of quilt top bankruptcy made me excited to work on Ursula Minor. Let me take you back to earlier this year. In the springtime, Mike Odell from Legit Kits reached out to me and asked if I would be willing to work on a legit kit. And I am still very green when it comes to FPP, so I was a little nervous about it, but I was up for the challenge. So we agreed that I could work on this quilt top. He did offer me a much bigger kit, but I was intimidated and I wanted something small to work on first. I figured it would be much easier for me to finish one of his 30 by 40 kits than to finish one of his 60 by 80s. So I asked for Ursula Minor. I could have had something big that was much more expensive, but I strategically went for this one because I felt like I would actually get it done. I did finish piecing this months ago, and it sat on my quilt top, or I'm sorry, my quilt rack for a bit. I got really, really in my head on this one. When I got the quilt kit, I knew instantly that I wanted to do matchstick quilting. That's what I wanted to do for this. I wanted to piece it, and I wanted to do matchstick quilting just to add a little bit of texture, but let the piecing shine. I didn't want to touch any other stitch on there. That's all I wanted to do. But once the quilt was done, I got so many suggestions and so many comments, and so many different people told me how they would quilt it. I heard do swirls in the background for wind, do this type of stitch on the bear to represent his fur, or do this or do this. There was so many different recommendations and they were all great. But I felt overwhelmed because I didn't feel like I could do those stitches well. And then I started thinking I wasn't good enough to do the quilt at all. So I wouldn't quilt it. And it just turned into this cycle. Once I took those quilts off the ladder and sent them off to Beth, I just decided we were going to go for it. We were going to stitch it. And there was no looking back. So I got Ursula out. I loaded her onto the quilt frame, and I basted her down, and I just started stitching. I did what is called, I believe, matchstick quilting, and I leaned into this a little bit. So in the world of matchstick quilting, they say that not having exactly perfect straight lines, exactly evenly spaced, is okay because it adds to the depth and dimension of the quilt. My lines are not perfectly straight. They're straight-ish. And they are not all exactly a 1/4 inch apart. Some of them are more like a 1/16 of an inch apart. And it looks great. If I go back over to the, oh, no, sorry, that's the wrong one. If I go back to the overall picture of the whole quilt, can you tell? I mean, sure, I think there's a couple areas where you see a little bit more puffiness than other areas, but I think that adds visual interest to the quilt, and I love it. So after I got this all quilted, I decided I needed to get it bound. I did not know about facing. I had heard people talk about it. Hindsight, this quilt would have also looked great faced, but I decided to do binding because, by the way, let's just show you this really quick. Hold on. There we go. I just want to show you the back. It's that same blue as the other quilt, if you haven't noticed that yet. But I want to go back to the binding for a second. Sorry, I got a little sidetracked. Here's a close-up of that stitching on the back so you can kind of see it as well. When I was finishing the quilt, I wanted to bind it in a white, and you can see that from the front of the quilt. In my head, when I added that white binding, it was going to make it feel like a picture frame, which is the effect that I wanted to go for. Last year, Donna taught or led a Bargello on her channel. She's going to be doing another one in October, I believe, maybe November. I can't remember the date. If she's in the chat, she'll tell you, or one of her moderators from her channel can drop that in there. But she's going to be doing another Bargello. Not the same pattern, different Bargello. It was a lot of fun last time. I do intend to do it this way, or this time again. But I'm bringing that up because that Bargello that I did last year, I quilted actually myself, and I bound it in a white fabric, and I gifted it to my sister-in-law for Christmas last year. There was so much color and so much visual interest. There's so much going on in the quilt that white binding around all four edges, it stopped your eye without adding a border, and I thought it was genius. And so I'm kind of in love with white bindings right now. So I took that white binding and I applied it here too. The binding in this lighting does look a little off-white, but it is a white, and it looks great. And there you have the detail of the quilting on the back. So you can see a little bit more in this shot that my lines, while they're straight-ish, they're not perfectly straight all the time, and they are not consistently the same exact distance one after another. So yeah, overall I think that was great. In my opinion, sending out those first 3 quilts that I showed you allowed me the creativity, the creative freedom, and yeah, the creative freedom to actually quilt Ursula Minor. I had to get rid of the things that were hanging over my head so that I could free up that side of my brain to actually want to do something else and not feel like I was completely overwhelmed. But I do want to tell you something else. Not but. I guess I didn't need to say that. It's the beauty of a live stream. When you're just talking nonstop, sometimes it sounds nonsensical. This bin is something that I have been holding on to because I wanted to share it with you during the reveal of Ursula Minor. And I'm pointing over there because it's laying right there. This is the bin that I put all of my fabric for Ursula Minor in. When you get a legit kit, you buy the fabric pack and the pattern, and all of the fabric comes with two little letter codes, and it tells you what the fabric is. They're Kona cottons, and that lettering system, like this is periwinkle and the code is PW. Periwinkle is always PW, no matter what quilt kit it's used in. Periwinkle is always PW. Quicksilver is always QQ. So if you take the time to take your kit and sort it in these file folders like this with the label, the next time you get another legit kit, you can add that fabric to this file folder and you can just keep building it up. So if you ever run out, you actually have fabric left over from a previous kit. I wanted to share this with you because I've had a few people ask if I had any fabric left over, and I'm just going to leaf through this a little bit so you can kind of see. Yes, I had a lot of fabric left over from legit kits. If you're new to the legit kits world, one of the things that they tell you is they have a fabric guarantee. If you run out of any fabric at any time for any reason, whether it's your mistake, theirs, or your dog's, they will replace your fabric or send you more, no questions asked. So when you get a legit kit, they do give you a cutting guide. But when I put Ursula together, I didn't follow the cutting guide. I did not lay out the templates the way they told me I needed to. I just hacked and sawed at the fabric very generously to put Ursula Minor together. And you can see, like, this piece, this is all I have left of this one. But on the little label, let's see if I don't know if I can get it in there, it tells you how big the fabric was that you got. Originally, I only got a 4.5 inch by 5.5 inch piece, and this is what's left, which is still quite a bit. It looks like there's nothing in there, but I got just a fragment of fabric for that one left. So I'm just kind of leafing through so that you can see how much this is a fat eighth, by the way. Look at how much of this is left. These are some good size chunks. So if you've been on the fence about pulling the trigger with legit kits, because maybe you're afraid that you're not going to have enough fabric or it's not going to be worth the while, maybe this helps you. I could probably put a whole nother quilt together with all of these scraps. Am I going to? No. Oh, this is Pepper. This is the one that Sean was talking about. He and I have talked a couple of times about some of his go-to fabrics, and he has mentioned several times that Pepper is one of his go-to colors for Kona cottons. Oh, that's snow. Oh, look at me going down the color line. I'm getting close to the end. Yep, that's the last one. So those are all of my scraps from Ursula. Now, let's talk about Ursula's mistake. And that's where we're going to end the video. Well, we'll ask questions. I'll take some questions before, but I want to show you Ursula's mistake. So first, I'm just going to open it up. Take a good look at this quilt. See if you can find where the mistake is. Now, there might be more than one, but to my knowledge, there is only one mistake. And to me, it is glaringly obvious. And I will tell you, it was more obvious before it was quilted. And now that it's quilted, it looks less obvious. Any guesses? I'm going to tell you in just a second. Before I tell you where the mistake is, I'm just going to be fully transparent and point it out. But before I tell you where that mistake is, I'm going to tell you what happened on this so that maybe you can learn from that going forward. I was so eager to get my kit put together. I was whipping through the blocks, and this one particular block was one of the last ones that I had to work on. I got all the blocks I thought pieced together. And as I was starting to assemble the two rows together, I realized that I had completely missed adding the last piece of fabric to that block. And by that point, I had already sewn that block to the next block. All my rows were assembled and I just needed to put the rows together. Could I have gone back at that point and added in the little missing fabric? Sure, absolutely. Did I? Obviously not. Now, do you want to know where that is? Take a look at his shoulder, his right shoulder. There's an area where his paw comes up to meet his body, and it's just staggered just a little bit, maybe like a 1/2 inch. There was supposed to be a piece of fabric that went from that kind of rounded that out, so he had a nice round shape to him. And because I missed that piece of fabric, it's not there. But overall, because all of the points and the lines in this are so sharp, I think it's okay. That's the mistake in the quilt. And it's so funny because there are some people are saying it's his eyes or the purple on his forehead or maybe one of the nails on his on his toenails. That's exactly how it was supposed to be. There's so much going on in the quilt that some of you may have been able to point that out exactly right where it was, but some of you may never have seen it until I just pointed it out. So that's my one mistake in this quilt. Donnell said, it's just a ruffle in his fur. VR says, I don't see it at all. Our mistakes tell us about our journey. Yolanda goes, oh, I see it. See? Yep, you pointed it out. I don't know why I pointed it out other than just to show you that my stuff isn't perfect either. I'm still learning. I'm still coming along, and it's going to be okay. And I love it in spite of that. And I got to tell you, adding the quilting to it made it less noticeable to me. I can't wait to have this displayed in my sewing room. So this one is another one where I use that glue binding trick, and I got to tack it down by hand. And it's one of the 3 that'll be on rotation in my sewing room. So. All right, so that's what I had for you today. I can't believe I just talked for almost a whole, I said oh my gosh, what happens on a live stream stays on a live stream maybe. That's what I've got for you this week. Those are the finishes coming out of my sewing room. Couple of announcements for you. Number 1, did I start on the giant panda quilt? Yes, I did. We did have a bit of a snafu though, and I want to talk about this for a moment. In fact, I'm going to pull the bin out. Am I going to pull the bin out? Maybe I'm not going to pull the bin out. I thought I had the bin right here. Oh, here it is. Yep. So as you guys know, I am working on the Pandas and Sweaters quilt. Sean is doing this as well. This is an Elizabeth Hartman pattern, and my dear friend Mary loves all things pandas. So this quilt is going to be for her. It is designed to make a quilt that has 9 panda bears on it. You can make a small quilt with 4 pandas on it, or just a pillow with just 1 panda. Mary wants the quilt to be close to king size, so just imagine how heavy that one's going to be. So she has asked me to make the quilt with 20 pandas. 4 across and 5 down. And I'm up for the challenge. We're going to do it. But we did have a bit of a snag. Originally, we pulled the fabric for this, and I don't know what happened. She doesn't know what happened either, but we pulled the fabric for it. And the goal was to make the pandas look like they are in the picture. I don't know if you can see it in the detail. Let's see if we can get the camera to focus a little bit better. But looking at this, you can see that the pandas are actually like a really light black, and their nose and the pupils of their eyes are a dark, dark black. And so she wanted this to be put together with art gallery fabrics. And so she picked caviar for the body of the panda and double dip black for the eyes and the nose. And they're very close. They are very close in color. However, when I pulled out the fabric and started working with them, they were so close that there appeared to be no difference. It felt like what had happened is all of the fabric got cut either from caviar or double dip, and I have no idea which one it was. So we had to make a design choice. On Saturday, Jason and I ran a couple of errands, and one of those errands was us going to the quilt shop. And I looked to see if they had any of either of the blacks, because if they had the caviar, maybe I could match, right? And figure out which one we had and which one we didn't have. They didn't have any. So I did get a few yards of a very dark gray that we could have used for the bodies of the pandas, but Mary was very specific that she wanted her pandas to be black and not gray. So I sent her a picture of what I had bought. I can always use it later if she didn't want it, but I sent her a picture of what I had bought, and I gave her an option. I said, we can keep the black for the eyes, the pupils, and the nose, and use the gray for the body of the pandas. It'll mean I'll have to starch and recut out all the fabric for the panda bodies, but no big deal. We can absolutely do that. Or we can keep the black that you cut for the bodies of the panda and just change out the pupil eyes. And we can even keep the nose. It'll be the same color as the rest of the panda. Because, and I'll show you, the pattern actually gives you, and I'll see if I can kind of hide some of this. My phone will work. If you look right here, I'm on the wrong thing. If you look right here, one of the versions, oh, I guess you can't see that. Let me see if I can bring you in closer. There it is. One of the versions of the pandas is a black and white panda where you have white pupils instead of the black pupils. So I had asked her originally when I thought there was a problem before I went to the quilt shop if she wanted me just to make the pupils white. And she said, no, I really want the eyes to be black. Well, when I went to the quilt shop, they didn't have any of the black. So I got that gray and I showed her the gray. And at that point, she decided, okay, let's change course. We're just going to do the white pupils. So where I am right now with the overall panda quilt is I have made all of my pupil units. We have whites for the eyeballs and we have black going around them. There are 40 pupils here, 20 for each eye, 20 right and 20 left. They're starched, they're squared, they're perfect. Now, maybe they might be a little lopsided when we put them in to be within the face itself, but I think overall it's going to be okay. I've decided, looking at how the kit is cut and the way the pattern is laid out, I'm not going to do this one panda at a time because it would take me far longer to put this together that way. What I'm going to do instead, ooh, there's a fly. What I'm going to do instead is assembly line sew this. So I've taken, ooh, gosh, where did it go? I opened the door to take trash out and all these lights, it must have been in here. Anyway. What happens on a live stays on live. Becca's chasing a fly. So what I have decided for this project is I'm going to sew this by units. I'm going to make the pupil units. Then I'm going to make the eye units. Then I'm going to make the ear units. Then I'm going to make the mouth units. You see where I'm going? And then once I have all of my units put together, then I'm going to make the pandas. And then I'm going to add the sashing and put the pandas into their quilt. So I won't have a finished panda block to show you until much later on in the project. I am going to do this assembly line and we'll see where that takes us. Speaking of sewing the pandas quilt, I want to let you know that this Saturday, Sean's going to have me on his Brekkie with Sean. So he has a live stream every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. And we are both going to be working on our panda quilts together for a little while. So if you're looking for someone to sew with around 8 a.m. Eastern time this Saturday, hop on over to his channel. You can grab his link by doing !Sean in the chat box down below, give you a link to his channel, and we'll see you there with a cup of coffee and some fabric and a sewing machine. So that's all I've got for you this round. Are there any questions that I can answer before I let you go? I'm going to take a look at the chat. If you have any, just tag me in them, and then we'll see if I can get those answered before we end. Yes, I used glue. I used glue to secure down the binding. I applied the glue. I actually used Roxanne's glue based it. Although Elmer's glue works just as fine, I used the Roxanne's glue based it. I just put a couple drops, little dabble do ya, folded it over, and then I put my iron on it to heat it up and dry it out. Rebecca Shank says, actually, I think it looks so obvious, so you just need to send Ursula Minor to me. That's funny. Let's see, what else do we have? Callie says, I will go back and see your other quilts because I missed the beginning. Awesome, no problem. Mert says, I'm so glad I made it tonight. I have my posy quilt ready to bind today. Awesome. Beth said, thanks for sharing with us tonight, Becca. Beautiful quilts. Callie says, I've uploaded my monthly vlog video today, but I have accomplished almost nothing compared. Hey, listen, it's really easy to say I accomplished a lot when all I had to do was start binding on 4 quilts, because that's what I did, right? That's fine. Shirley says, I am doing that pattern and doing the eyes in brown. Awesome. Sean said it would be fun if the eyes were different colors, some brown, some green, some blue. Listen, I don't have creative control over this quilt. I have to do what the boss tells me. So they are black and white. Ursula does look good. Thank you, Nikolai. I appreciate that. Did you say faced instead of binding for Ursula quilt? What is faced? This is something I learned. So it is not faced, it is bound. But while I was gluing the binding to the back for Ursula so that I could hand tack it down later, Ian taught me about the world of facing a quilt. So the idea with facing a quilt is you attach the binding, but instead of having that binding wrap around, to the back of the quilt so that you can see the binding from the front, the side, and the back, it almost folds over completely so that you don't see the trim at all. You don't see any binding from the front. And in doing so, you also attach these squares of fabric that are folded on the 45-degree diagonal in all four corners to help keep everything nice and tidy and have finished seams. But it gives you also these corner pockets that you can use to hang the quilt up if you want to. The idea is it finishes off your quilt without having that hard stop. So if you have a quilt that you don't want it to look framed, you just want it to just kind of bleed out, that's something you could do. Similar, I guess, to a pillow turn. Lily says, what are those pretty boxes on your far left? Those over there. These are storage bins that I use. I'll pull them out so you can see. This is how I have my fat quarters and charm packs stored. They were over there so you didn't see them. Sorry, I'm stretching because I sat for too long. I'll pull one of each out. These are bathroom organizing bins that you get from Target. And I will show you. My charm squares fit in here perfectly. And so do my fat quarters, fat eighths, or even half-yard cuts. This bin in particular is all of my, if you touch this fabric, I will kill you, because it is out of print Lala Boutique fabric that is special to me and I am waiting to use. So I organize my fat quarters and even charm packs, honestly, by designer or line. So, or just like collection. So I have one for all my solids. I have one for Tula Pinks. I have one for my Lala Boutiques. I have one for my boutiques. I think I said boutiques. I don't know. So that's what these are. I think that's what you were asking about. VR says, will you do another legit kit? Yes, 100% I will. In fact, I'm working on Vortex. There's 12 months in Vortex. I am on month 8. I need to do 9 through 12. I want to buy another one. The problem is they're a little pricey. They are worth every single penny. Absolutely. I am not delaying my purchase because they're overpriced. I just can't afford it yet. I want to do a big one, but I don't want to spend the money on the kit until I have Vortex pieced and Ursula done. Ursula is done. I'm probably a little bit more than halfway done with Vortex. Once Vortex is pieced, it'll be time to shop for one. And the reason why I'm waiting, the money thing is part of it, but the other reason is I've got so many projects that I want to make progress on, and I'm trying to be very purposeful and diligent in acquiring new projects, right? I just started the panda quilt. This is a challenge, or a collab, I should say. He challenged me, so I say challenge. But this is a collab I'm doing with Sean. So this is a new project that I just started. I don't want to keep adding projects to my shelf because the goal is to finish more than I'm bringing in to start. So until I have Vortex pieced, I don't want to take the plunge with another one just yet. But I'm on that site and I'm looking. And boy, oh boy, there's some kits that are really hard for me to not pull the trigger on. Ellen says, I did my first face finished a couple weeks ago. It was easier than I expected and it looks great. I can't wait to do that soon. So we'll see. Danelle says, Ian, did you hear that? She'll kit you if you touch those pins. Well, fortunately, Ian is it thousands of miles? He's definitely several hundred. He is many, many miles away from my Tula Pink fabric and I don't have to worry about him stealing it. So all right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to end the live here because I do know that our friend Stephanie over at Memoirs of a Longarm Quilter has started her live stream, or should have. So we're going to wrap up here, and then I'm going to automatically set it up so that it will redirect you to her live stream. And if you hop over there, you find yourself in the chat, give her some love. If you like what she's doing over there and you're not already subscribed, please consider hitting that subscribe button, give her the thumbs up, and tell her I sent you. I'll see you guys all on Friday night. Bye.